I should not be here. Let me tell you what I mean by that, truly mean, in the fullest and most terrible sense of those words. Not merely that my presence in this place is unlikely or unexpected, not simply that the odds of my survival were slim and have been defied through some combination of luck and determination, but that my continued existence represents a violation of the natural order so profound that even speaking of it feels like blasphemy against the fundamental architecture of reality itself. I walked upon a world where the laws of creation do not apply, where time and space and matter are merely suggestions that the inhabitants ignore at their leisure, where the very concept of survival is a joke told by entities that have never known death and find the struggles of mortal creatures amusing beyond measure. I walked there, and I breathed that air, and I witnessed things that no human mind was designed to contain, and somehow, I returned. The Inquisition does not believe me. They have told me so in the clinical chambers where they have kept me for the 17 months since my recovery, in the interrogation rooms where they have dissected my memories with tools both physical and psychic, in the hushed conversations they think I cannot hear through walls that were not designed to contain someone who learned to listen in places where sound itself was a living thing. They believe I am corrupted. They believe I am a vessel for something that followed me back from that place, a door left ajar through which horrors might pour into the material realm. They may be right. I no longer trust my own perceptions enough to argue the point, but they have not killed me yet. They have not sanctioned my execution, have not dissolved my flesh in the acid baths, reserved for those too tainted for conventional disposal. Instead, they keep me here, and they ask me questions, and they record my answers with devices that hum and click in the darkness of my cell. I think they want to understand. I think they believe that somewhere in the wreckage of my testimony, there might be knowledge worth preserving, tactical intelligence about an enemy that defies tactical analysis, some fragment of insight that might help the Imperium in its eternal war against the things that dwell beyond the veil. So I will tell them. I will tell you. I will speak the words that have been building in my chest like pressure in a sealed container. And perhaps in the speaking, I will find some release from the weight that has been crushing me since the day I opened my eyes on that impossible shore, and understood that everything I had believed about the nature of existence was a comforting lie, told by people who had never seen the truth. My name was Sergeant Mordecai Thresh, of the 47th Vostroyan Firstborn. I was 43 years old when our transport, the Emperor's Deliverance, was pulled from the warp during a routine transit between the Scaris sector and our deployment coordinates in the Calixis expanse. I do not know what went wrong. I was not privy to the navigational mysteries that guided our vessel through that hell dimension, was not informed of the astropathic warnings or the fluctuations in the Geller field that the ship's officers must have observed in those final hours before everything came apart. I knew only that I was sleeping in my bunk, dreaming of the ice fields of Vostroya where I had spent my childhood, and then I was awake and the ship was screaming. Not the alarms, not the crew, but the ship itself, metal shrieking as it was twisted by forces that existed outside the boundaries of physics, bulkheads buckling as something pressed against them from dimensions that had no names in any human language. We crashed. That is the only word I have for what happened, though it fails to capture the experience in any meaningful way. We crashed upon a world that should not have existed, a planet that hung in a sky of burning purple and sickly green, its surface a landscape of impossibilities that my eyes refused to process and my mind refused to accept. I remember crawling from the wreckage of our transport, Remember the feel of ground beneath my hands that was not rock or soil or any substance I could identify. Remember looking up at a horizon that curved in the wrong direction and seeing structures in the distance that seemed to be built from solidified agony and frozen screams. 1,700 souls had boarded the Emperor's deliverance when we departed from Port Wanda. 43 of us survived the crash. I know this because I counted them, because I gathered their names and their ranks and their units in the first hours after our landing, because some desperate fragment of my training insisted that order must be maintained even when order itself had become a meaningless concept. 43 soldiers of the Emperor, stranded on a world that existed in the Eye of Terror. For that is where we were, I learned later, that festering wound in reality, where the warp and the materium bleed together, and the ruinous powers hold dominion over everything that exists. We were on a demon world. We did not know it then, did not understand the full horror of our situation, did not comprehend that we had been deposited in a place where survival was not merely unlikely, but definitionally impossible. Demon worlds do not permit survival. They are not designed for it. They exist as playgrounds for entities that feed on suffering and terror and the slow dissolution of everything that makes human beings human. And the concept of a mortal creature enduring within their borders is as absurd as the concept of a flame surviving at the bottom of an ocean. And yet we tried. Emperor, forgive us. We tried. I organized the survivors into squads, established a perimeter around the wreckage of our transport, sent scouts to survey our immediate surroundings and report on potential threats. I did these things because I was a sergeant, because leadership was my function, because the alternative was to sit in the impossible dirt of that impossible world and scream until my throat tore itself apart. The men and women under my command looked to me for guidance, and I gave them guidance, and we all pretended together that the skills we had learned on 1,000 battlefields might somehow apply to a place where the very air we breathed was saturated with malevolence. The first death came within 6 hours of our landing. Private Yevgeny Stross, a young soldier from Vostroyan Tertiary who had been with the regiment for less than a year, simply stopped existing. There was no attack, no visible threat, no warning of any kind. One moment he was standing watch at the eastern edge of our perimeter, his laser gun ready, his eyes scanning the twisted horizon for movement. The next moment he was gone. Not dead, not transformed, not dragged away by some predator we had failed to detect. Gone. Erased. The space where he had stood was empty, and when I tried to remember his face, I found that I could not. Found that my memories of him were fading like morning frost beneath a rising sun. Found that within minutes I could not recall his name or his rank or whether he had ever existed at all. I know his name now only because I wrote it down before the forgetting could take it from me. I wrote all their names down in a journal that I kept clutched against my chest through everything that followed. A desperate attempt to preserve some record of the souls who were consumed by that place before they could be unmade from history itself. 43 survivors became 42, and then 41, and then fewer still, and the world around us watched and waited and smiled with mouths that had no faces. And I understood, slowly, terribly, with a comprehension that felt like knives being driven into the meat of my brain, that we were not stranded on this world by accident. We had been collected. We had been gathered. We had been delivered to this place as offerings, as entertainment, as toys for things that had been playing with mortal suffering since before humanity had learned to walk upright, and the game was only beginning. Let me tell you what I witnessed in the days that followed, what truths were carved into my soul by experiences that should have destroyed me, but somehow did not. Let me tell you why no one ever survives a demon world. and let me tell you why I am still breathing, still speaking, still capable of testimony, when everyone I knew and loved and commanded has been unmade into nothing but entries in a journal that grows heavier with every name I add to its pages. The world had a name, though I did not learn it until later. The demons called it Velathrix, a word that meant something like the Garden of Unbecoming, in a language that predated human speech by epochs beyond counting. I do not know if the world had always been called this, do not know if it had once been a planet of rock and water, an atmosphere like any other, before the Eye of Terror swallowed it and remade it into something that served the purposes of its new masters. I know only that the name felt right when I finally heard it, whispered by one of the things that hunted us through its impossible geography. Felt right in the way that a diagnosis feels right, when a chirurgeon finally identifies the disease that has been killing you by inches. Velathrix, the Garden of Unbecoming, the place where human beings were planted like seeds and harvested as something else entirely. The landscape defied description, but I will attempt to describe it nonetheless, because the telling is all I have left, and the silence would be worse than the inadequacy of words. The ground beneath our feet was the color of bruised flesh, a purple-black surface that yielded slightly when we walked upon it, that seemed to pulse with a rhythm too slow to be a heartbeat, but too regular to be coincidence. The sky above us was a wound, there is no other word for it. A great suppurating gash in the fabric of reality, through which light poured in colors that had no names and should not have been visible to human eyes. There were structures in the distance, towers and spires and edifices that seemed to be built from materials that included bone and metal, and something that might have been crystallized thought. Their architecture following geometries that made my eyes water and my stomach clench with nausea whenever I looked at them too long. And there were faces. This was the first thing I noticed. The first horror that sank its hooks into my consciousness and refused to let go. The world was covered in faces. Not creatures with faces. Not beings that possessed facial features as part of their anatomy. But faces alone, embedded in the ground and the structures and the very air itself, their mouths moving in silent screams or whispered prayers or conversations that I could not hear, but somehow understood were about us, about the survivors, about the entertainment we would provide in the days to come. Some of the faces were human, some were not. All of them were watching, always watching, their eyes following our movements with an attention that felt like physical pressure against my skin. I ordered my soldiers not to look at the faces. It was a futile order, impossible to obey in a landscape where the faces were everywhere. But giving the order made me feel like I was still in command, still capable of exercising authority in a place where authority meant nothing at all. The first night taught us that darkness on Velathrix was not merely the absence of light. When the wounded sky finally dimmed, not setting, for there was no sun to set, but simply growing darker as though the world itself was closing its eyes. The darkness that descended was thick and wet and hungry. I felt it pressing against my uniform, seeping through the fabric, trying to find the gaps in my armor where it could touch bare skin. The soldiers around me were breathing harder, faster, their exhalations visible not as mist, but as small glowing motes that drifted upward toward the sky and were consumed by the darkness before they could rise more than a meter from their lips. We were exhaling something more than air, I realized. We were breathing out fragments of ourselves, tiny pieces of our essence that the world was collecting with each breath we took. We lost 4 more soldiers that first night. Corporal Dmitri Vask walked into the darkness and did not return. When dawn came, if dawn is the right word for the slow brightening of that suppurating sky. We found his uniform lying empty at the edge of our perimeter, arranged as though he were still inside it, his laser gun still clutched in gloves that contained nothing but air. Private Sarah Morlova began speaking in tongues, her voice producing sounds that human vocal cords should not have been capable of making. And when we tried to restrain her, she simply dissolved, her flesh running like wax down a candle, pooling on the ground in a shape that twitched and shuddered for hours before finally going still. Two others, I will not write their names. I cannot write their names. The forgetting took them too quickly, simply vanished between one heartbeat and the next, their existence erased so thoroughly that I could not be certain they had ever been real at all. 42 became 37. The journal grew heavier in my hands. On the second day, we saw the inhabitants of Velathrix for the first time. They came at midday, if time had any meaning in that place, emerging from the twisted structures on the horizon, with a grace that seemed to mock the laws of physics. They were beautiful. This is the thing that I struggle most to convey, the detail that makes my interrogators look at me with suspicion and doubt. They were beautiful, the demons. Beautiful in a way that bypassed the rational mind and struck directly at something deeper, something primal, something that recognized beauty as a category of experience even when the thing being experienced should have provoked nothing but revulsion and terror. They moved like dancers, like flames, like the idea of movement given physical form. And their bodies were arrangements of light and shadow and color that seemed to shift and flow even as I watched, never settling into fixed shapes, never allowing my eyes to rest upon any single feature long enough to memorize it. They did not attack us. This was perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. They simply watched, circling our perimeter at a distance that kept them just beyond the effective range of our laser guns, their eyeless faces, for they had no eyes, only smooth expanses of perfect skin where eyes should have been, somehow conveying an attention that was more intimate than any gaze I had ever experienced. I felt them looking at me, looking through me, reading the contents of my soul like a scholar reads the pages of a book. I felt them evaluating me, weighing me, determining what use might be made of the raw material that I represented. And then they spoke, not with mouths, not with sounds that traveled through the air and struck my eardrums in the ordinary way. They spoke directly into my mind, their words forming in my consciousness like memories I had always possessed but had only now recalled, like thoughts that had been waiting for permission to surface. The voice was singular and plural at once, a chorus of whispers that somehow formed coherent speech, and what it said to me in that moment has been burned into my memory with a clarity that nothing else from that world possesses. "You are the one who writes the names," the voice said. "You are the keeper of the record, the witness who believes that remembering will somehow matter. We have watched ones like you before. We will watch ones like you again. Your kind always believes that testimony has power, that speaking the truth can somehow change the nature of reality. It is charming, this belief. It is part of why we enjoy you so much." I did not respond. I did not know how to respond. I stood with my laser gun raised and my jaw clenched and my heart hammering against my ribs. And I tried to project defiance even though I knew that defiance meant nothing to creatures that had existed since before humanity had learned to use fire. "We will not kill you quickly," the voice continued. "Quick deaths are wasteful, uneconomical, a poor use of the resources that have been delivered to us. We will take our time with you and your soldiers. We will teach you things about yourselves that you have never known. We will show you the shapes that your souls can be carved into when the proper tools are applied with the proper patience. And when we are finished, when there is nothing left of you, but the hollowed shells that once contained something called humanity. We will add your names to the garden, and we will wait for the next delivery." The demons departed then, flowing back toward their impossible structures, leaving us alone with the knowledge of what awaited us. I looked at the soldiers under my command. 37 faces, 37 human beings who had trusted me to lead them, 37 souls that I had promised to bring home safely. And I saw in their eyes the same comprehension that was forming in my own mind. We were not going to be killed. We were going to be processed. And somehow, impossibly, the processing would be worse than any death we could imagine. I made a decision in that moment, a decision that would shape everything that followed. I gathered my soldiers around me, gathered their attention and their fear and their desperate hope that someone might have a plan, and I told them the truth, not the comfortable truth, not the reassuring lies that a good commander might tell to maintain morale, but the actual truth of our situation, spoken plainly and without embellishment. "We are going to die on this world," I said. "All of us. There is no rescue coming. There is no escape. We are on a demon world in the Eye of Terror, and no one survives such places. This is not opinion. This is not pessimism. This is the nature of reality in the place where we have been delivered." I paused, and I looked at each of them in turn, and I tried to memorize their faces before the world could take them from me. "But we are soldiers of the Emperor," I continued, "and if we must die, we will die as soldiers. We will die fighting. We will die resisting. We will make them work for every moment of suffering they extract from us, and we will deny them the pleasure of our surrender until the very last breath leaves the very last body. This is all we can do. This is all that remains to us. And by the Emperor's grace, it will be enough." It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was all we had, and so we clung to it, and we began to march toward the structures on the horizon, toward the demons that waited for us, toward the fate that had been prepared for us since before our ship had been pulled from the warp and delivered into the Garden of Unbecoming. We marched, and we died, and I wrote their names in my journal, with hands that grew steadier with each entry, because steadiness was the only defiance I had left. The demons kept their promise. They did not kill us quickly. They did not descend upon us with claws and teeth and the simple violence that we had been trained to resist. Instead, they took us apart piece by piece, experience by experience, stripping away the layers of our humanity with a patience that suggested they had been practicing this art since before the first human soul had flickered into existence in the cradle of ancient terror. They were gardeners, I came to understand, tending to crops that had been planted in the soil of mortal consciousness, nurturing growths of despair and madness, and the particular species of horror that can only flourish in minds that still remember what hope once felt like. The third day claimed 7 of us, not through violence, not through the direct intervention of the entities that circled our dwindling column like predators waiting for the weak to fall behind. The world itself consumed them, the landscape of Velathrix reaching up with fingers of impossible geometry to pull them down into depths that had no bottom, into spaces that existed between the spaces we could perceive. Sergeant Yuri Volkov, a man I had served beside for 15 years, a soldier whose wedding I had attended on Vostroya before the regiment shipped out, stepped onto what appeared to be solid ground and simply sank, his body descending into the purple-black surface as though it were water rather than earth, his eyes meeting mine as his head slipped beneath the surface with an expression not of terror but of profound and terrible understanding. I reached for him. My hand passed through nothing but empty air. The ground where he had stood was solid when I tested it, as firm and unyielding as rockreet, as though it had never opened to swallow a man who had survived 30 years of warfare, only to be consumed by dirt that was not dirt in a place that was not a place. I wrote his name in my journal that night, the 19th entry in a list that would grow much longer before the end, and I did not allow myself to weep because weeping was a luxury that commanders could not afford, and tears were moisture that the world might find a use for. The others fell in similar ways, absorbed by shadows that moved with purpose, claimed by sounds that existed at frequencies human ears were not meant to hear, taken by sensations that bypassed the body entirely and struck directly at the soul. I watched Private Katja Sorensen walk towards something only she could see, her face transformed by an ecstasy that looked like agony's mirror image, her lips forming words of worship to a presence that I could not perceive, but could somehow feel pressing against the edges of my consciousness, demanding entry, promising revelations that would make all suffering worthwhile. She did not scream when she reached her destination. She laughed. The laugh continued long after her body had ceased to exist, echoing across the landscape of Velathrix like a bell tolling in a cathedral of madness. And I understood that she had not been killed, but converted, that some essential part of her had been translated into a form that could exist in this place without the inconvenient limitations of flesh and bone, and the sanity that flesh and bone require. 37 became 30, then 23, then 17, and still we marched, because marching was all we knew how to do, because the alternative was to stop and wait and let the world take us at its leisure, rather than forcing it to chase us through its own geography. I do not know what I hope to accomplish with this motion. Do not know what destination I imagined might offer sanctuary in a realm where sanctuary was a concept as foreign as sunlight or kindness, or the simple human comfort of a meal shared among friends. I marched because stopping would have meant admitting that I had led these soldiers to their doom, that my orders had brought them to a place beyond rescue, that every death that followed was a weight I would carry until the world finally decided to collect me as well. The demons began to speak to us individually on the 5th day, not as a chorus, not as the unified voice that had addressed me when they first revealed themselves, but as intimate whispers tailored to each survivor, personalized messages that found the cracks in our psychological armor and poured themselves inside like water seeking the lowest ground. I do not know what they said to the others. Each soldier's communion was private, audible only to the one being addressed, but I saw the effects in their eyes, saw the slow crumbling of resolve as the entities found the fears and desires and secret shames that each of us carried, saw strong men and women begin to waver as truths they had hidden even from themselves were spoken aloud by voices that had no mouths. The voice that spoke to me was soft, almost gentle, carrying the cadence of a parent explaining difficult truths to a child who is not yet ready to understand them. You write their names because you believe that names have power, it said. You keep your journal because you imagine that record-keeping is a form of resistance, that the act of witnessing can somehow protect the witnessed from dissolution. But names are merely sounds, Mordecai Thresh. They are vibrations in air, scratches of ink on paper, temporary arrangements of information that will fade and scatter like everything else that mortals create in their desperate attempts to matter. I did not respond. I had learned that responding only encouraged them, only gave them more material to work with, more hooks upon which to hang their carefully crafted torments. We have your name as well, of course. We have had it since before you were born, since before your parents met, since before the first thresh drew breath on whatever world spawned your bloodline. Your name is written in books that were old when your species was young, recorded in libraries that exist in dimensions your mind cannot perceive. You are known to us, Mordecai. You have always been known. And the journal you clutch so tightly is merely a copy of records we have kept for eons. The voice paused, and I felt something that might have been amusement radiating from the presence that surrounded me. But please, continue writing. It brings us pleasure to watch you perform this little ritual of resistance. It makes the eventual breaking so much more satisfying. I wrote 17 more names that week. I wrote them with hands that shook, with eyes that burned from exhaustion and exposure to light that was not light, with a mind that was slowly filling with cracks through which the whispers of Velathrix poured in an endless stream. Each name was a small victory, a tiny defiance, a refusal to let the world unmake my soldiers from history without at least one record of their existence. The Daemons were right. The names had no power, changed nothing, accomplished nothing, except to fill pages in a journal that would probably be consumed along with everything else when my turn finally came. But writing them made me feel human, and feeling human in that place was the most radical act of rebellion available to me. On the 8th day, we reached the structures we had been marching toward. They rose above us like the spires of some impossible cathedral, their surfaces covered in the faces I had learned to ignore, their architecture following rules that made my brain ache when I tried to trace the lines of their construction. There were doorways set into the bases of the towers, not doors, but doorways, openings that led into darkness so complete that it seemed to have physical weight, to bulge outward from the frames that contained it, as though eager to escape and spread across the landscape. The demons had gathered here in numbers beyond counting, their beautiful, terrible forms arranged in patterns that might have been ceremonial, or might have been merely aesthetic, watching our approach with the patient attention of an audience awaiting the beginning of a performance. We were 12 by then, 12 survivors out of the 43 who had crawled from the wreckage of the Emperor's deliverance, 12 souls who had somehow endured 8 days on a world designed to consume everything mortal that set foot upon its surface. "Welcome," the chorus voice said, and this time it resonated from every direction at once, from the towers and the ground and the sky and the spaces between atoms, vibrating in our bones and our blood and the marrow of our being. "You have traveled far. You have resisted admirably. You have provided entertainment that exceeded our expectations, and for this we are grateful." I raised my laser gun, knowing it was useless, knowing that nothing I could do would harm these entities in any meaningful way. Around me, my soldiers did the same. 11 weapons pointed at targets that existed in dimensions our weapons could not reach. 11 acts of defiance performed by people who had nothing left but the defiance itself. "You have earned the privilege of choice," the voice continued. "This is a gift we do not offer to all who come to us. Most are simply processed, their souls rendered into useful forms without consultation or consent. But you who have marched and endured and written names in a journal, as though names could somehow preserve what we choose to unmake, you will be allowed to choose the manner of your unmaking." The doorways in the towers began to glow with light that was not light, illumination that seemed to darken everything it touched rather than brighten it. Behind each door is a different path, a different way of ceasing to be what you are and becoming something more useful to our purposes. Some paths are quick, some are slow, some preserve fragments of what you were, some erase everything, every memory, every experience, every trace of the soul that once inhabited your flesh. We will not tell you which door leads where. We will not offer guidance or advice. We offer only the choice itself, the last choice you will ever make as the beings you currently are. 12 survivors looked at 12 doorways, and I understood that this was the final cruelty, the last refinement of the torment that had been designed for us since the moment our ship fell from the warp. They were not content simply to destroy us. They wanted us to participate in our own destruction, to choose the path of our unmaking, to carry the weight of that choice into whatever existence awaited us on the other side. One by one, my soldiers began to move toward the doors. I watched them go. I wrote their names in my journal as they crossed the thresholds into darkness, each entry a farewell, each scratch of ink a prayer for souls that were beyond the reach of any prayer. Private Alexei Vorn, Corporal Misira Dreskin, Sergeant Yakov Tul, Lieutenant Pyotr Chenkov. One by one, they chose their doors, and one by one, they disappeared into the hungry dark. And I was left alone with my journal and my laser gun, and a choice I did not know how to make. 11 doors had been entered. One remained. And standing before it, I finally understood why I had survived so long, why the world had taken everyone around me while leaving me to witness, why the demons had spoken to me with such particular attention throughout our march across their garden. I was not meant to enter a door. I was meant to return. I was meant to carry the record back to the Imperium, to spread the knowledge of what I had witnessed, to plant seeds of despair in the minds of everyone who heard my testimony. I was their message. I was their weapon. And the choice they offered me was not which door to enter, but whether to accept the role they had designed for me, or to refuse it and enter the last door anyway, erasing myself rather than serving their purposes. I stood before that final doorway for what felt like hours, the darkness calling to me, promising oblivion, offering the release that every part of me craved. And then I turned away. Emperor, forgive me. I turned away. The demons laughed. It was not the cruel laughter I had expected, not the mocking derision of predators watching prey make a futile attempt at escape. It was warm laughter, appreciative laughter, the sound of an audience delighted by a performer who has exceeded all expectations. The beautiful, terrible entities that ringed the cathedral structures clapped hands that were not hands, stamped feet that were not feet, produced sounds of approval that resonated through dimensions I could not perceive, but could somehow feel vibrating in the hollowed-out spaces where my certainties had once resided. Yes, the chorus voice said, and there was something like affection in its tone. Yes, this is what we hoped for. This is why we chose you from among all the others. Why we let you keep your journal. Why we whispered to you differently than we whispered to the rest. You understand your purpose. You accept your role. You will carry our gift back to the worlds of the living, and through you, we will touch minds that would otherwise remain beyond our reach. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to raise my laser gun and discharge it into my own skull, to refuse the fate they had designed for me, to choose oblivion over complicity in whatever purpose they intended. My finger found the trigger. My hand began to move, and I could not do it. This was the true horror, the final revelation that broke something fundamental in the architecture of my soul. I could not choose death. I could not embrace the release that waited for me in the barrel of my own weapon. Some part of me, some deep and primal fragment that existed beneath consciousness, beneath will, beneath everything that I had believed made me who I was, wanted to live with a ferocity that overwhelmed every other consideration. The demons had not merely offered me a choice. They had reached into my being and ensured that I could only choose one way, had planted seeds of survival hunger so deep that I could not uproot them no matter how desperately I tried. They had not corrupted me. They had revealed me, You see it now, the voice said, gentler than before, almost tender. You understand what you truly are beneath the uniforms and the oaths and the conditioning that your Imperium uses to transform humans into weapons. You are a creature that wants to live, Mordecai Thresh. You are an animal that will do anything, sacrifice anything, betray anything, become anything, to continue existing for one more moment, one more breath, one more heartbeat. This is not weakness. This is the truth of your species, the foundation upon which all your civilizations and religions and noble ideals are built. Everything else is decoration. Everything else is lies you tell yourselves to make the wanting bearable. I fell to my knees. The journal slipped from my fingers and landed in the purple-black dirt of Velathrix, its pages fluttering in a wind that came from nowhere and everywhere. The names of my soldiers exposed to the hungry air of a world that had consumed them one by one, while I watched and recorded and survived. We could keep you here, the voice continued. We could process you as we processed the others, render you into forms more useful to our purposes, extract from your soul the essences that make you valuable. But that would be wasteful. That would squander the potential you represent. You are worth more to us alive and walking among your own kind than you could ever be as raw material in our gardens. The demons began to move, flowing around me in patterns that might have been ritual or might have been simply aesthetic, their forms casting shadows that fell in directions the light did not explain. I felt their attention focused upon me like weight, like pressure, like the regard of gods who had chosen me for a destiny I had not asked for and could not refuse. We are going to send you back, the voice said. We are going to open a door that leads not to unmaking, but to the material realm, to the space between stars where your kind builds its fragile ships and dreams its fragile dreams. You will be found. You will be recovered. You will be questioned by those who believe they can extract useful intelligence from your testimony. And through all of it, you will carry us with you, not as possession, not as corruption in the crude sense that your inquisitors understand the term, but as memory, as experience, as the seeds of questions that will grow in every mind that hears your story. I found my voice, though it emerged as a cracked and broken thing, a whisper that barely qualified as speech. Why? Why go to such lengths for one soldier? What purpose could I possibly serve that justifies this elaboration? The laughter came again, but softer now, almost pitying. You still think in terms of individual significance. You still imagine that our interest in you reflects some special quality you possess, some unique value that sets you apart from the billions of other souls your species has produced. But you are not special, Mordecai Thresh. You are merely convenient. You are a bottle into which we have poured a message, a vessel designed to carry cargo to a destination we cannot reach by other means. There have been others like you before. There will be others like you again. The specifics of your identity are irrelevant. What matters is the function you will serve. The demons parted, and behind them I saw something that should not have existed. A tear in the fabric of Velathrix, a wound in the wound, through which I could glimpse the cold and sterile darkness of real space, of the void between stars where the laws of physics still applied, and the light of distant suns still travelled in straight lines at speeds the universe permitted. Go, the voice commanded. Return to your Imperium. Tell them what you witnessed. Let them record your testimony and analyze your memories and debate among themselves whether you are corrupted or merely broken. Let them watch you for signs of taint they will never find, because the taint we have planted is not in your flesh or your soul, but in the very act of your survival, in the questions your existence will raise, in the doubt that will spread like disease through every mind that contemplates the impossible fact of your return. I should have refused. I should have found the strength to reject their gift, to choose one of the doors behind me, to embrace unmaking rather than serve as an instrument of whatever purpose they intended. But I have already told you what I learned about myself in that moment, what truth the demons revealed about the creature that exists beneath my oaths and my training and my belief in the Emperor's light. I wanted to live. I wanted it with a hunger that eclipsed everything else, that made principles and honor and duty seem like distant abstractions compared to the immediate and overwhelming imperative of continuation. I crawled toward the tear in reality. I dragged myself across the purple-black ground of Vilathrix, past the watching faces, past the beautiful, terrible entities that had orchestrated my survival, past the doorways into which my soldiers had vanished one by one. My fingers found the journal where it had fallen, and I clutched it to my chest as I moved, because the journal was all I had left of them, all I had left of myself, the only proof that any of what I had experienced was real, and not simply the elaborate hallucination of a mind that had shattered beyond repair. The tear grew larger as I approached, or perhaps I grew smaller. Distance and scale had no fixed meaning on Vilathrix, and I had long since stopped trying to make sense of perceptions that defied the categories my brain had been built to process. I felt the cold of real space reaching through the opening, felt the blessed emptiness of a void that contained nothing but vacuum and radiation, and the honest indifference of a universe that did not care whether I lived or died. I passed through. The transition was not gentle. Reality reasserted itself with a violence that felt like being born, like being torn from a womb of madness into a world that operated according to rules I had almost forgotten. I tumbled through vacuum, my lungs burning with the last breath I had taken on Vilathrix, my eyes streaming with tears that froze instantly in the absolute cold of space. I should have died then, should have suffocated or frozen or simply ceased to exist as my body encountered conditions it was never designed to survive. But they had not sent me back to die. They had sent me back to live, to testify, to spread the seeds they had planted in my soul across every mind that heard my story. The ship that found me was an Imperial patrol vessel, a small craft on routine sweep through a sector that bordered the Eye of Terror. They told me later that I had been drifting for 6 hours when their sensors detected my life signs, that my survival was a medical impossibility that their chirurgeons could not explain, that I had been clutching a journal filled with names and dates and descriptions of horrors that made the ship's captain weep when he read them. They brought me to an inquisitorial facility. They subjected me to tests and interrogations and examinations that stripped away every layer of privacy I had ever possessed. They searched my flesh for signs of corruption, my mind for traces of demonic influence, my soul for the marks of the entities that had released me from their garden. They found nothing. They found nothing because there was nothing to find, because the demons had spoken truly when they said the taint they planted was not in my body or my spirit, but in the simple fact of my existence, in the questions that my survival raised, in the doubt that spread through the Inquisitors' minds as they contemplated the impossible reality of a man who had walked on a demon world and returned. I have been in this cell for 17 months. I have told my story 100 times, to 100 different interrogators, in 100 different ways. They record every word. They analyze every syllable. They search for inconsistencies, for signs of deception, for evidence that I am something other than what I appear to be. A broken soldier, a shattered witness, a bottle, containing a message from entities that have been waging war against humanity since before humanity existed. They have not found what they are looking for. They never will. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, in gardens where human souls are planted and harvested like crops. I know that the demons of Velathrix are watching, waiting, smiling with mouths that have no faces, as their seeds take root in every mind that hears my testimony. This is what they wanted. This is what I have become. And I cannot stop telling the story, cannot stop spreading the message, cannot stop being the weapon they designed me to be, because I want to live, because I have always wanted to live. And the price of living is this: endless testimony, endless repetition, endless service to masters I cannot see, and purposes I cannot understand. The demons were right about everything. I wish they had been wrong. I am telling you this story because I cannot stop telling it. I need you to understand this, need you to grasp the full weight of what it means before you dismiss my testimony as the ravings of a broken mind or the calculated deceptions of a corrupted soul. I am not choosing to speak. I am not deciding each morning when my interrogators arrive to cooperate with their questions and provide them with the information they seek. The words pour out of me like blood from a wound that will not close, like water from a spring that has no bottom, like the endless whispered prayers of pilgrims who have forgotten why they pray but cannot stop the motion of their lips. I tell this story because the telling has become as involuntary as breathing, as necessary as the beating of my heart, as fundamental to my existence as the want for life that the demons revealed lurking at the core of everything I am. This is their gift. This is their weapon. This is why no one ever survives a demon world. You see, I have come to understand something in the 17 months of my captivity, something that my interrogators have not grasped despite all their training and all their tools and all their centuries of accumulated wisdom about the nature of the enemy we face. Survival itself is the corruption. The very fact of my return is the taint they search for and cannot find. They look for marks upon my flesh, for whispers in my mind, for the subtle signs of demonic influence that their texts and traditions have taught them to recognize. But the demons of Velathrix are older than those texts, wiser than those traditions, playing a game so vast and so patient that the Inquisition's methods are like children's toys, wielded against weapons forged in the hearts of dying stars. They did not need to corrupt me. They only needed to let me live. Every soul that hears my story will ask the question that I asked myself as I stood before that final doorway. Why did he survive? Every mind that contemplates my testimony will wonder what makes Mordecai Thresh different from the 42 soldiers who died on Velathrix. What quality or flaw or secret bargain allowed him to walk out of a garden where nothing mortal is permitted to endure? And in the asking of that question, in the wondering and the doubting and the desperate search for answers that do not exist, the seeds take root. The message spreads. The purpose of my survival fulfills itself through the very act of being questioned. I am not corrupted. I am doubt-made flesh. The inquisitors who hold me understand this on some level, I think. I see it in their eyes when they study me, in the hesitation that creeps into their voices when they ask their questions, in the way they avoid looking at me directly, as though my gaze might infect them with something their wards and their faith cannot protect against. They know that keeping me alive is dangerous, that every day I continue to exist is another day the message spreads, another day the seeds grow deeper into the soil of imperial consciousness, and yet they cannot bring themselves to execute me, cannot bring themselves to silence a testimony that might contain intelligence valuable enough to justify the risk of its continued existence. This too is part of the design. This too serves the purpose. I have thought often, in the long hours between interrogations, about the soldiers who died on Velathrix, about the 42 names written in my journal, each one a human being with a history and hopes and fears that I never had the chance to know. I have wondered what became of them behind those doors, what forms they were rendered into, what purposes they now serve in the gardens of the demons who collected us. I have prayed for their souls, though I no longer know if my prayers reach anywhere beyond the walls of my cell, no longer trust that the emperor I was raised to worship has any power in the places where such entities hold dominion. But I have also wondered if they were the fortunate ones. They are beyond doubt now, beyond questioning, beyond the endless torture of testimony that has become my existence. Whatever they have become, they are no longer burdened with the weight of survival, no longer carrying messages they did not choose to carry, no longer serving as weapons in a war they never agreed to fight. The doors they entered led to endings, and endings, even terrible endings, even endings that remake the soul into something unrecognizable, are at least conclusions, at least resolutions, at least the cessation of the endless forward motion that defines mortal existence. I have no ending. I have only continuation, and continuation, I have learned, can be its own form of hell. The journal sits on the table before me as I speak these words, its pages worn soft from the countless times I have turned them, its bindings stained with the dirt of Vilathrix, and the tears I have shed in the months since my return. The names are still there, all 42 of them, written in my hand, preserved, against the forgetting that the world tried to impose upon them. Yevgeny Stross, Dmitry Vask, Sarah Morlova, Yuri Volkov, Katya Sorensen, Alexei Vorn, Mira Dreskin, Yakov Tul, Pyotr Chenkov, and all the others, all the soldiers who followed me into the garden of unbecoming and did not follow me out. I carry them with me. I will always carry them. This is the only part of my survival that does not feel like corruption. The only fragment of my existence that I can still believe serves a purpose that is my own, rather than one designed by entities that view human suffering as entertainment. The demons wanted me to return as a vessel for doubt, as a weapon against the certainties that hold the Imperium together. But they could not take the journal from me, could not erase the names I wrote, could not prevent me from carrying the memory of my soldiers back through the tear in reality that delivered me to the void. Those names are my rebellion. Those names are my defiance. They will say, when they finally tire of questioning me, that I am a broken man, a soldier whose mind shattered under pressures it was never designed to withstand, whose testimony is unreliable, whose existence is an embarrassment to be quietly disposed of and forgotten. They will seal my records, classify my journal, ensure that the story I have told spreads no further than the walls of this facility. They will believe that in doing so, they have contained the threat, have prevented the seeds from taking root, have protected the Imperium from the message I was designed to carry. They will be wrong, because the question has already been asked, has already taken root in the minds of everyone who has interrogated me, everyone who has read my file, everyone who has heard even a whisper of the impossible fact of my survival. Why did he live? What makes him different? What bargain was struck? What price was paid? What truth does his existence reveal about the nature of the enemy we face and the war we are losing by inches across 10,000 years? The question is the message. The doubt is the weapon, and I am merely the vessel that carried it home. I do not know how much longer they will keep me alive. I do not know if the execution order has already been signed, if the priests are already preparing the rituals that will ensure my soul does not fall into the hands of the entities that released me. I do not know if anything I have said will matter, will make a difference, will serve any purpose beyond the one designed by the demons who garnered my survival with such patient and terrible care. But I know this. I was there. I walked on a world where nothing mortal should survive. I witnessed the unmaking of 42 human souls and wrote their names in a journal that I carried through the void itself. And I returned, not because I was strong or pure or blessed by the Emperor's grace, but because the things that dwell in the eye of terror found a use for me that required my continuation. No one survives a demon world. This is the truth that the Imperium teaches, the warning that keeps the faithful from venturing too close to the wounds in reality where such places exist. But I survived. And in my survival, in my testimony, in the questions that my existence will raise for as long as anyone remembers that I existed at all, the demon world survives with me, spreading, growing, taking root in every mind that hears my story and wonders, even for a moment, why I alone was permitted to return. This is my testimony. These are the names I carry. And the Emperor, if he is listening, knows that I am sorry. Sorry for surviving, sorry for returning, sorry for being the weapon I was made to be. But I cannot stop wanting to live. I have never been able to stop. And that, in the end, is why no one ever truly escapes.